All right. Hi, I'm Eric Wilkie, and with Joel Betts and Jared Pelo. So, Jared, thanks for joining us.
You bet.
We've heard about Jared through Matt that we talked to earlier. So, Jared, you're an emergency medicine physician. So, if you don't mind, how'd you get started down that journey?
Well, it's interesting in probably like most emergency medicine physicians, like you like everything in med school. And so you're like, oh, what can I do? And then at the time, naively, I thought it was a great lifestyle. Those who have lived it know that it's not. Um, and so, yeah, I chose to do emergency medicine, went to UVA, University of Virginia, to do my residency, and was a lot of fun. Started practicing in a level 2 center that was, middle of nowhere, but high volume. We'd see 100,000 patients a year.
Wow.
So a busy ED. And after a few years, I was starting to experience like burnout already. And I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I did all this training to get to this point and like already kind of not loving it.
Hey,
And one of the,
what was the cause of the burnout, do you think?
you know, I don't know how much of it is just like your whole life in medicine, you're constantly striving for something else. And then you like get there. It's like, chasing the dog and you catch him by the tail. And then you're like, oh, what do I do now? And so I don't know if it was that, if it was boredom. And so, I mean, the way I tried to solve it, I definitely wouldn't recommend to anybody. But I mean, my first try was, so I talked to my partners and just said, hey, like the older guys that have been doing it for a long time, like, how do you guys stay so happy? And it was actually like the happiest guy in our group. I asked him, I was like, how do you stay so happy? And he's like, you know what, Jared, every day that I'm not working, I'm dreading coming to work. And I was like, well, that is a terrible pep talk.
Yeah, that didn't help at all.
It was like the worst. But he said, people who seem happiest, they do stuff around medicine that's not the doctor work. So he's like, I find that people who either start like a little side gig where they're doing something in medicine, or they go into administration or something that like keeps them interested. And so I decided to try administration for a year and became the medical director of one of our smaller EDs, like a 36,000 patient a year ED. And that's a terrible job. I know you guys.
It's a balancing act for sure. I don't know if it's the right move. I made the same mistake when I was first experiencing burnout. I'm like, oh, maybe if I take on a bunch more responsibility, that'll help. I'm like, no, that didn't help.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was like, now I have to own everybody's problems, not just like my problems, like calling patients up, apologizing, like
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And so that's when I decided to start iScribes. Actually, was we had a scribe program where I was at, but at this other ED that was an hour away, we didn't have one. And every once in a while, I'd steal my favorite scribe and we'd drive down the road together, and he'd come to work with me. And so we were just doing this drive all the time, and we thought of, well, actually, Google Glass had just come out back in 2012 or something. And so we're driving down the road in 2013, and I was like, why don't I get a pair of Google Glass and you just join me remotely? And you can sit in the ED in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I'll go to Farmville and we'll do this thing. And of course, it wasn't that easy. And that was kind of the inception of it all. And then, then we just thought, well, if we capture this data, then probably someday some smart people will figure out how to make this data automated and like write notes with AI. So that was kind of the inception of iScribes.
Yeah. Well, I think, I wouldn't say we're in the golden age of AI. I think we're just in the early, crawling out of the hole. But but we took some technology that we had built over, some time to help with some charting, and we've plugged into some large language models. And so now we can do a recording, ambient talk, builds the note, helps build your differential, helps you think of things that you might have forgotten, help like, hey, this patient has AFib, you didn't do a Chad VAS score, do they need anticoagulants? And oh yeah, I should probably do that. It's definitely not perfect, but we're just at the beginning. Like ChatGPT is barely a year old.
Yep.
So I think we're looking at some amazing stuff coming up. But all right, so you started iScribe, and you then had that acquired by Nuance, correct?
That's right. The makers of Dragon.
Yeah. And so then your product is then rolled in as that suite. Is it and is it the ambient AI chart generation piece?
That's right. Yeah. So, when they acquired us, they asked us, like, what are you trying to build with this? And we explained, like, exactly what you guys are doing now. At the time, they were like, no, it's impossible. Like, it's not going to happen. But then after a year of them playing with the data that we'd captured, which was recordings and then final notes, and they started building these transformer models, which is the same kind of technology that underlies large language models. And they started saying, okay, this is going to work. We just need more data. Then we just went and captured more and more data, signed up more doctors. Is completely manual for a long time. And then probably about 2 years ago, about a year before GPT-4, maybe 18 months before, Dragon Ambient Experience was actually really good. And still, it's a little bit better than GPT-4 at kind of the summarization. It doesn't hallucinate as much. It's very focused on medicine. That's what we built, and it was cool to see that process.
Yeah, this is. I probably want to ask you a lot more questions than we have time for, but yeah. So on, the prompt creation with these large language models is now like it's a whole thing. Because we had to dial the temperature way down because I wanted if you had the same input, I want the same output. I don't want hallucinations. I don't want you making up a bunch of crazy stuff. So it's fascinating to see the space and see it develop. But all right, so how long were you with Nuance before you jumped to your next thing?
Yeah, so I was at Nuance from 2017 till July of last year.
Were you working clinically at the time, or was you now like, I'm...
Yeah, so in 2018, I stopped clinical practice and then just restarted again this year, but not in the emergency department.
Okay.
So yeah, doing more kind of concierge type medicine now. I've stayed, of course, kept my board certification in CME and all that stuff. Love emergency medicine, especially after, everything, medical director and running EDs. And like, I'm so grateful for people that still have the willingness to go into the emergency department. It's dangerous to leave because once you leave, you realize how hard, like what a difficult job it really is, but how vital it is.
Yeah. So Bionic Health, that's your newest, right? And so what were you thinking? Like, how did it come to fruition? How did it start from an idea to like actually launching it?
Yeah. So about 6 months before GPT Chat was released, I was able to play with some of the more advanced AI models, 3.5 and 4. And I'd done some internal work at Nuance, just kind of showing the capabilities of GPT-3, which was an imbecile compared to GPT-4, right? Like it was so stupid, but you could still with expert guidance, you could make it do some pretty smart things. And so when I saw GPT-4, which wasn't just like an incremental, and you guys saw this as well, the whole world saw it. It wasn't just like this incrementally better, is like, 100x better than GPT-3. I just thought there's so much of medicine that still needs to be automated. There's so much of the administrative work of the doctor that we can still automate beyond just the note. And where else can we plug in around clinical decision support? And so my idea was, okay, where's the least dangerous medicine practiced? And so not the ER. So I went to kind of preventative medicine, and we're trying to automate it absolutely as much as we can. So like Peter Attia type medicine, like how can you automate that medicine and make it so anybody can use it anywhere?
All right.
That's a really cool idea, because I've been doing some reading on Attia and kind of that whole field, and it is interesting because there's a lot of like, oh, by the way, you should be doing this, and by this age you should be doing this, and a lot of people rely on their primary cares to do that, and we in the ER know that a shocking amount of people don't have primary cares, even into their 60s and 70s. Sometimes they're like, well, I only see the doctor when I'm sick. So that's a really great area to focus in. I mean, especially to start out.
Well, and then on top of that, I've got friends that are primary care, and with the reimbursement, and most are now employed by hospitals, right? The independent practice is largely gone, and the pressure to churn is so high. Like you just, I would struggle with bandwidth on how to do an adequate job all the time with all the demands and pressures.
Yeah. 15 minutes. I mean, it's impossible. Like, how can you deliver a year's worth of great care in 15 minutes? Like, totally inadequate.
Well, and then if you try and chart as you go, like that even shrinks that time more, and then if you don't chart as you go, you're spending all this uncompensated hours and hours later, time away from family. The people that do it well, my hat's off to them, because it can be like maybe not as high pressure as emergency medicine, but the same kind of gruel and grind.
Yep, exactly.
But all right, so how does Bionic Health work?
Bionic Health, it's interesting because I was looking at some of the stuff you guys do. I mean, you kind of talked about it, like you have an EHR, and so you're able to plug in AI into the EHR. And part of the reason Bionic Health, we're building it more as like a outside of like CMS and insurers, is because I don't want anything to slow us down. And so we built our own EHR and built AI in from the beginning. And so we have different models, whether those are large language models or our own models, kind of working inside the EHR to automate both communication, so kind of like inbox type stuff with members, which we just have a direct chat, and then the AI tries to answer the chat, the doctor reviews it, and will respond accordingly. And then analysis. So we intake all their medical history, medical data, record every visit that we're on, of course, and then the AI will generate all the documentation analysis, clinical decision support, stuff like that. And we've only been doing it since March of last year, so not even a year yet. And so we're a long ways from where we want to be, but people sign up, and for the patient, it's this very kind of prescriptive. They start off, and we talk about the major ways they're going to die. Most likely it's going to be a heart attack or a stroke. I mean, that's the number one killer. And so we have these modules that they step through, and each module kind of takes them through all the different steps, like check your blood pressure for 2 weeks. After they check their blood pressure for 2 weeks, they upload that data. We automate this report that comes back to them, kind of grades them, tells them what they need to work on. Doctor delivers that back. And these modules, we have anywhere from, you can sign up for 2 modules a year up to, I think, 8 modules a year. And each one of them is kind of like this little packet of work that they go through, and the app just steps them through, like, do this thing next, they sign it off, do this thing next, they sign it off. So It's definitely more targeted towards people who care about their health, right? It's not, you guys know this. It's not everybody who cares about their health. So it's targeted more towards those people, and then automating as much of that process as possible.
Yeah. So you launched, I guess, about a year ago, you said.
Yep.
How's it been going?
It's been good. It's been good. We have 100 members. I have a couple other MDs that are on board. I guess one DO, and they help me take care of the members, and they just kind of work contracted part time. Today we're just in North Carolina, but we want to be nationwide over the next few years. But we're just trying to figure everything out, right? Because we have to find imaging partners and lab partners and all the different partners. I mean, the medicine part is the easier part. The logistic part is like much more of a headache than anything else.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, I think did you go through a round of funding just recently?
Yeah, so we raised funds in March of last year. We raised 3.5 million, and then we've just been building. We have 5 engineers and a couple other like care team members.
So had you raised capital before with iScribe?
Yes.
Okay.
So I raised the other thing of note is last time I was the most senior person on my team. This time my co-founder, CEO, is probably more senior than me. He's only a month older than me, but I tell him he's much more senior than me. But he built an AI company called Automated Insights, and they were probably the first generative AI company. They wrote newspaper articles and fantasy football summaries starting in 2012.
Oh wow!
And so
back in the dark ages of AI.
Yeah, the dark ages of AI, right? Yeah, he was on my board at iScribes because if we hadn't sold to Nuance, then he was the one that was going to help us figure out how do we build this on our own.
Yeah. So going through medical school and residency, how many business classes had you taken?
0. Even in undergrad, I wasn't a business person. In undergrad I did religious studies because I was doing biology, but I was working in the lab. Like that was my full-time job, was working in a lab, and I was doing biology, and it was hard. And I took a ethics class, and there were all these football players in there. And I asked them, like, what's your major? And they're like, religious studies. And I was like, perfect, mine too. So I switched to religious studies, and it was great.
So what was the learning curve like? Like going to raise money, you know, there's, you can do unregulated, friends and family, but then as you get more down the road, there's more things that you have to do and responsible. Like how'd that process go?
Oh, I mean, it's been quite the education over the last 9 years. All along the way, I mean, raising your first round is super educational. Being acquired by a giant company is very educational. Trying to survive in an even bigger company is very educational. So yeah, it's been amazing. I've had great kind of mentors and partners along the way that have helped me kind of learn the rules of the road.
All right. So I've got, like I said, a lot of questions. If there's some emergency physician or any physician listening, it's like, you know what, I would be interested in taking an idea and trying to move it forward. Yeah. And if you kind of looking back over what you've learned, and we're going to give them a couple points of advice on things to think about early, what would you tell them?
The first thing, so there's a couple different ways you can tackle things. You can do very incremental, like nights and weekends and free time, or you can kind of go all in. When I started iScribes, it was actually 4 doctors that founded it. It was me, cardiologist, and ENT doctor, and 2 ER docs. So I guess 5 docs. But within like 2 or 3 weeks, I realized they weren't going to do anything. Like I was cutting my shifts way back so that I could spend time on this and build this company. And of course they're like, this is a great idea, let's do it. Like so much excitement, but then like they weren't going to risk what they had. So one, I think it's deciding like what kind of founder are you? Are you the incremental founder? You're going to do it nights and weekends. And one of those guys has kind of done nights and weekend stuff and does some consulting stuff and, that kind of work. Or are you the type of person that you're willing to gamble and cut back to minimum shifts and invest your retirement and try to build something, which is way scarier. And I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but it worked out okay for me.
Yeah. A lot of people I know that have built, successful businesses. There's been the story of like, I almost lost everything, or like I couldn't make payroll. I was looking through the sofa cushions. Like, was it for every overnight success? I'll show you 8 years of really hard work.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So did you have like we use Traction? It's kind of our operating system for the business. Did you have something that you did? Yeah.
So I love Traction. And I would say we use parts of Traction. I also love a gentleman named Patrick Lencioni.
Oh yeah.
So
I got a bunch of his books over here.
Yeah, exactly. So he has a similar but slightly different operating plan that he kind of outlines in The Advantage.
Yeah.
And so that's the one that I kind of keep coming back to over and over again. Although there's a lot of things in Traction that I think, like, I really think you need a visionary and an integrator. Like, I think that's key. Like, and Traction is such a great kind of framework, and they have such a good community. Also, you can find consultants who will come help you. It's a good one.
Yeah, I have to say, I think we've got an amalgam of Patrick Lencioni's The Advantage, Traction, and then 4 disciplines of execution, right?
Nice.
Because, the level 10 meetings are great, but if I'm working with a bunch of ER physicians, like the time's different, so you can't get everybody at the same time at the same place. So just based off of what we do, that's a little, it's hard to get that fit. All right. So with Bionic Health and the AI that you're building in foundationally, and you've been in this for a long time and seen GPT-4 before it was released to the, into the wild. What is your best guess of AI involvement in medicine over the next, it's hard to go too far out, so let's say 24 months?
It will be much more capable than we're willing to let it do, is what I would say. Like, I would bet that in the next 24 months, and remember, if you think of AI as a knowledge creator or knowledge base, I think that's the wrong way to think of it. So if you think of it as like, it's going to replace a doctor because it knows everything, then I think that's the wrong way to think of it. If you start to think of it as it's actually a reasoning engine that a doctor can use to increase their reasoning, speed up their processing, and bring things to their fingertips, I think that's the right way to think about it. And so some of the things that are difficult is, like, AI is very good if you give it good data. So what's called retrieval augmented generation. So it goes and looks for the right data and brings it back and then answers the question. Although GPT-4 isn't great at that because it was trained to actually think it knows things. And so it wasn't trained to go look first. It was trained to just like try to answer things. So then you have to use kind of these multi-agent systems where you say, you're not smart. I don't want you to tell me anything. I just want you to go find things. And then you use another agent that says, okay, when you get delivered this knowledge from this other agent, now I want you to read it and understand it and then answer me. And so these multi-agent systems, and in fact, Microsoft has shown with a paper that's called MedPrompt, where if you do this, it's like a 30-step process. You can get it almost perfect every time. It can solve almost everything. So the AI itself is super capable. What we will allow it to do in medicine broadly, like I think there are innovators like yourselves, like me, who will push the envelope, and we'll tell our doctors, like, don't trust it. You need to double check it. You can't just like sign off on it. But I think AI or medicine more broadly, I think we're going to be surprised how slow. Of course, like note writing, like that's everywhere now.
Right.
But as far as other clinical decision support, I think people are going to be really slow.
Right. Well, we're testing something, so it should come out this quarter. We've been doing some tests, and I sort of view it as I'm just an average doctor. Like I'm nothing special, and so I want.
That's not true, Eric. Come on.
I want to do the right. I want to do the right thing for my patients, right? And so I can't know everything. I know 5 rashes. That's it. And so I want tools to help me, help my patients. And so one thing that we're testing right now is an image. It can be any image. It could be a EKG. It could be a CT scan that you took off of the screen, or it could be a rash of the patient. Yeah. And feed it to the AI and have it come back with suggestions of what's likely. Yeah. And seeing that, like you said, it's not perfect. You need to verify it. You need to double check. You can't take it at face value, but it's surprisingly good. Like one, I specifically found an EKG that had WPW, and it wasn't crazy. It wasn't wide QRS. It wasn't AFib. It's just a subtle little delta wave. And if I'm on a busy shift and the nurses are handing me multiple EKGs and you're looking at them, you're signing them and passing along, I guarantee I would have missed that in a busy shift, unless I had something from the patient complaint that made me look more in detail for that thing. We gave it to the AI, and I was like, oh, this is what Parkinson White. And so if I can use these tools to augment how I operate and help me perform at a higher level, I think that for me is like the golden ticket.
Yeah. One thing I remember when we were talking to Matt Lundgren, and I had mentioned to him that I sometimes will hear docs in the ER and they're like, oh, we're all going to be out of a job. And they're kind of, some of them are a little scared about it. They're like, oh, it's just going to be a kiosk and you sit down and then, and he said, I don't envision it that way. I think he used the term that AI is going to push into a new renaissance period of medicine where it's going to take a lot of the stuff that we're required to do, these notes and differentials and testing and all these things, and give us the tools to kind of get back to the bedside more and that human connection. So that's what he was saying. And that made me feel a little bit better because, you hear all these doomsday scenarios of like, we're going to be out of a job and we're just going to be doing blood draws or something, but when you really think about it, the stuff that you're talking about, the automation of a lot of these things, those are the tasks that I think most docs don't like that much anyway. Nobody's like went to med school or like, I'm going to type the best note you've ever seen, man. I'm going to kill it. They went because they like that human connection. They like the diagnostics, but there is something there when you can plug all that data in, and there's a safety net where it says, hey, don't forget to look for WPW. Don't forget to look for like these inferior flip T waves. That could be a PE. And it's not diagnosing it, but it's like a trigger to you to go, yeah, that's a good thought. I need to run through that. So that's what I'm looking forward to more than anything, I think.
Well, if I were a radiologist, I'd be a little worried about my job, honestly.
Yeah, radiology maybe. Yeah.
Unless you're an interventional radiologist, because, like I said, the Methodist in Houston and MD Anderson, the mammograms are being read by AI. I'm sure the physician's still overseeing it because you want your belts and suspenders, but
yeah,
as these models get better, like it will start outperforming the human, no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. Well, they already have studies showing that, and I think once you've done 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 studies that show that, it's going to be hard for the insurance companies to say, yeah, we're going to pay to have this read twice, But
Well, yeah, and there are problems with AI, you know, but some of the things it's like, well, I can't quite do X yet. It's only a matter of time. Like these problems will get figured out.
100%.
so Jared, so your model that you've got in your location there, you said you're looking at going nationwide. Is that going to be something that you're going to be able to roll out and then just have patients from all over? Because I know, for example, I read Peter Attia's book, right? And I've got a buddy that recommended it to me, and he's like, I'm on a wait list to get into Peter. He wants to go see him, right? And I go, and so I guess he's in San Diego. It's like a 7-year wait list to get in to see. And he's just going to say the exact stuff that's in his book. I mean, he's just going to have these same recommendations. So is that kind of the idea, is that you're making this available to everybody through these automated mechanisms?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, we don't follow Peter Attia to a T.
Sure.
And I've kind of tried to curate my own list of experts that is helping us build this. So like the head of Duke cardiology is our head of cardiometabolic stuff. So he's helping us figure out like when he gets CTAs and calcium scans, at what age, and how do you predict heart disease in the best way? Of course, far above what the guidelines say, because the guidelines are all based on how do we spend the least amount of money to save the most amount of lives. And if we don't care about money, if somebody's like, I'll pay whatever to not have cancer, or I'll pay whatever to not have a heart attack, then it's really, okay, well, how do you figure that out the best? And so that's kind of what we're spending our time working on. And my ultimate goal, like I really believe, if we prove on the preventative medicine that it saves money to not get cancer or have a heart attack, then my goal would be, someday insurance will pay for this type of care.
Right. What's the fabled saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Exactly.
All right. So medical genomics.
Yeah.
Are you incorporating that into Bionic Health? And if not, are you thinking about that? How does it, that's such a huge topic in and of itself. But.
Oh my God. A year ago, I made this list of like all the stuff we were going to do, microbiome, medical genomics, like all this stuff. And then I started learning. And like, of course, like genomics, I knew about BRCA, I knew about PBL2, like I knew about like some of the cancer genes, some of the neurodegenerative genes. But and even pharmacogenomics, I thought that was interesting. Now we can dose drugs based off your genes. But I assumed we knew a lot more than we do. And so, I have a geneticist that's working with me, helping me build out the medical genomics piece for us. And there are people who lean in and they're like, we can tell you what to eat based on your genes. And that's not true.
Right.
Like if you have PKU, I'll tell you not to, not to eat certain things. But yeah, there's not very much like to tell you like whether you should eat more high carb or low carb. Basically, I would say most people should just eat more low carb. But and I'm happy to get your genome and then tell you that too. But yeah, so the way we're going to do it is we're going to be screening for the American College of Genetics Medicine has a list of genes that can be screened for. So we'll screen for those. And then we have another list of kind of neurodegenerative, cardiac, and other disease-related genes that we screen for. If you don't have it, we don't tell you anything about it. We're not like 23andMe and saying like, you don't smell asparagus when you pee. Like, we're not going to report that kind of stuff.
Not useful.
Yeah, not that useful. But if you have something, then we'll report it. And then we already have your genome as well. Mm-hmm. And so we can report on what you have, especially like the higher risk. Like, there are some interesting ones like ApoE status, which is for Alzheimer's.
Especially in preventative, like a lot of you're going to have specific ones you're looking at.
That's right.
Where, asparagus P is not like a marker for anything
Exactly.
concerning necessarily.
Exactly.
But some of those ApoE or those other ones are like, those are big. I mean, you've got some of those markers there. You've got some, precursors there that are going to be a potential problem. And what do you do now to avoid that in 15, 20 years, right?
Exactly. So that's kind of how I think about medical genomics. I think that it'll become more and more precise, but the crazy thing about genes is even if you have a BRCA, you're not guaranteed to have breast cancer. So it's not like you have a gene, you get something. There are a few diseases like that, but the epigenome, what gene gets turned on and what gene gets suppressed, I mean, it's such a complicated space. So then you have to move up and you combine genome plus blood markers, and then you can understand more. And so I think it's going to be an interesting space, and hopefully AI helps out there too.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, the epigenome is where I officially gave up when, they're like getting all these genes. They're like, oh, this is associated with this. You're like, okay, that seems logical. And then they said, well, the epigenome controls what okay, uncle, I give up. There's too much information. It's just too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you had the AI, you could apply that as we find. I mean, we don't. I mean, let's be honest. We know a lot about the genome at this point, but we don't know too much about epigenome at this point.
Yeah.
But as we learn, feed that in, and that could really be a real space for AI to really generate some information there.
Yeah, 100%. So much.
Yeah. All right. So, Jared, I was only going to take 30 minutes of your time, and now I've taken 40. So I think it's fascinating to kind of hear the journey, from ER physician. I think a lot of us deal with burnout. We sort of talked about the post-residency depression. It was just a term that, you get out and it's like, I did all that, and this is what I've got, and, coming to grips with it. And so I think it's fascinating to see people walk through and, how they navigate that. But so it's kind of the last question for you. What's on the horizon for Bionic Health?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really figuring out two things. One, how do we automate more and more of what the doctor needs to do? And I love the examples you guys kind of threw out, some of the things you were talking about was how do we build a zebra net? How do we make sure no zebras get through? Because you're used to seeing horses all day and you're like, yep, no STEMI, no STEMI, no STEMI. And maybe you miss the inverted T's or the WPW, right? And so, how do we build a zebra net around what we're doing? How do we automate more and more of what we're doing? And then, how do we spread nationwide and actually build a business that people are willing to pay for the service? Can we deliver a great experience? Those types of things.
Yeah. So if people wanted to, they're curious about Bionic Health, where do they go?
Yeah, bionichealth.com. Super easy. If we're not in your state yet, sign up for our newsletter. We'll kind of keep you posted. And if you're in North Carolina, sign up and be a member.
All right, that sounds perfect. I like North Carolina.
Oh, it's a great state. Yeah.
Yeah.
So much better than South Carolina. Those guys are losers now.
I know.
Man.
Yeah. Well, that yeah. I'm just reading the Wright brothers.
Oh yeah, fascinating book.
Yeah, so the Carolinas and Kitty Hawk, but I've got a friend that's a couple doctors that live in Asheville, and so
nice.
Fun to go spend some time in that direction. So
yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jared. I really appreciate it. It's fascinating to learn.
Well, it's great to talk with you guys. Two things. I love speaking with my fellow emergency physicians, especially those who are innovating and looking at what you guys are doing. It's awesome. We need more physicians willing to step outside of the bedside to do that. We absolutely do. Healthcare will not fix itself. And I really believe that we are the best positioned to bring the solutions that are useful.
Yeah. We get to see very closely how broken medicine is right now.
Yeah.
But, all right. Well, all the best of luck. I hope Bionic Health knocks it out of the park.
Awesome.
We'll be watching for you.
All right.
All right.
When we're in Texas and Arizona, you guys can sign up.
You got
That's
it.
awesome.
We'll do.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.